The African Union has called on the leaders of the Democratic Republic of Congo to work resolutely to preserve peace and stability. The call comes on the eve of an announced intervention by the President Felix Tshisekedi in the midst of a political crisis. Tshisekedi is expected to announce his long-awaited decision to get out of the coalition with his predecessor Joseph Kabila. But for more on this story, we cross live now to Lubumbashi in the DRC, where we are joined via Skype by the editor of the Kinshasa Times, Aime Zonveni. Aime, very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thanks for having me.
I understand there were reports of restricted movement for the former President Joseph Kabila today. Any credence to those reports? And who may want to block the Kabila from traveling around?
Well, indeed, Kabila has scheduled to travel to Lubumbashi today, and he was meant to travel in the early hours of the afternoon, but unfortunately, or maybe not unfortunately, but instructions came from high on that he should not be traveling there. And it appears it is the head of the state, the current incumbent, that has ordered that he should not travel to Lubumbashi.
So obviously this is a brewing crisis in the DRC, and we understand that the president will make an announcement any minute from now with regards to the simmering tensions between his supporters and that of Joseph Kabila. So what is the genesis of that particular crisis?
The crisis emanated from the fact that the coalition which emerged victorious from the polls held in 2018 has been going not so well. And in that coalition, it is the Kabila side that has the majority of ministers, that also has the majority in parliament. So that coalition appointed, Kabila's side appointed the prime minister and most ministers in key cabinets. They have been together for the past 2 years, and apparently it has not been functioning so well. So early in November, President Tshisekedi made a statement lamenting the fact that things were not going so well in the coalition, and that the DRC's population were not benefiting from that political arrangement. So he took on himself to consult, to cast his net wider in order to have views of all the political parties and personalities. And it is tomorrow that he is going to make a statement which will give the results of his consultations, and which many believe will maybe mark the end of the coalition.
And when President Felix Tshisekedi took up office in January last year, he wanted to implement very, well, I would say necessary reforms, well, at least on his part. And that plan was scuppered or was stifled by the need to forge a coalition with former President Joseph Kabila. So would it be in a position to implement those plans and those reforms now that he wants to kick Joseph Kabila out of this coalition?
Now, that will depend on whether he succeeds in getting the majority in parliament, because the political system in the DRC is such that it is, at the end of the day, the parliament that really either makes or breaks the key resolutions that are happening for the reforms. Now, in that parliament, it is still Joseph Kabila that has the majority. President Tshisekedi attempted to try and change that configuration by trying to convince some MPs, members of parliament, to join his camp. But that's a very difficult process, because they will have to leave their political formations, and that may result in them being removed from their positions. So unless President Tshisekedi secures a majority in parliament, it will be very difficult for him to be able to implement the many reforms that he has envisaged to undertake.
But then how would we be able to secure a majority, given the fact that President Joseph Kabila's party, the Common Front for the Congo, the FCC, has a crushing majority in parliament?
Many believe that that majority has been manufactured, and therefore it is not a very solid majority. It can swing sides. And if that happens, for instance, if you take what has happened today, there was a petition aimed at removing the chairperson of the National Assembly. And that petition apparently has gathered 250 signatories so far, which means that there are amongst those MPs, many now are sort of like distancing themselves from the FCC, which is Kabila's a political platform. So chances are that those dissenting MPs might switch side and join Felix Tshisekedi's side, and thereby increase his chances of having a majority in the parliament. And if that happens, and then he can have the chance to appoint a prime minister of his choosing, and therefore be able to implement his reforms.
Well, it suffices to mention, Mr. Zonveni, that the tensions began in July when President Felix Tshisekedi appointed 3 new justices to that country's top court, the Constitutional Council, and that caused, or rather it sparked protests from the Joseph Kabila camp. And one then wonders, what were the basic tenets of that particular coalition? Who had the clout or who had the influence over the Justice Department or over the judiciary for the Joseph Kabila camp to be making protest over such appointments?
Well, that specific court is very critical for the results of elections, because that's the court that has the final say on who wins or loses the presidential elections, and even for the legislative elections. And up until when those 3 judges were appointed, most of those that were there had been appointed in their various positions by President Kabila, and therefore many believed that the court was still under the influence of Kabila, and therefore President Tshisekedi felt that he should begin his process of sort of like recreating the balance to go to his side. That's one thing he did. It angered the Kabila side very much, because they knew that by losing control of over the Constitutional Court, effectively come 2023, it will be difficult to also decide on the outcome of the polls. The other key institution is the Electoral Commission, where also Kabila's side attempted to appoint one of the people under their influence, which also was prevented by President Tshisekedi. So obviously what President Tshisekedi is trying to do now is trying to have leverage or control of the key institutions that would guarantee a semblance of transparency come poll in 2023.
And there's been fears that should Joseph Kabila be completely and indiscriminately kicked out of the DRC politics, then the country will descend into total chaos. So what is the likelihood of the DRC descending into, nationwide protests or even violence, and deadly violence at that?
That is unlikely, because diplomatic pressure, chiefly from the United States, seems to indicate that any attempt to recreate instability in the DRC will not be countenanced. That's on the one side. On the other hand, it's very unlikely to say that Kabila still holds full control of the military, as it used to be the case when he was in power. Those 2 elements, therefore, lead many to believe that it will be difficult for President Kabila again to try and get the military to maybe mount a coup or initiate instability in the country. So to me, I think the likelihood of that happening is pretty slim.
Aime Zonveni, the editor of the Kinshasa Times, joining us live from Lubumbashi in the DRC and joining us via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure.